Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm Ryan Lee, and I'm your host for today, and I hope you once again are staying safe amidst the pandemic. And we will be talking about a multitude of topics, including the effects of the introduction of the Big Ten, as well as the Mountain West. And we will even get into some of the recaps of last week's games, as well as our previews of the games for this week, going into week number 8. Let's get right into it. And let's just start with this. Welcome back, Big Ten. Yes, the Big Ten is officially back, and I never got a chance to officially say it because it really is back for now. Because I've referred to a lot of things throughout the year so far because of the fact that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 have not had a single game started yet. However, if you look at some of the rankings and the way that, especially the Associated Press, the AP, if you will, the way they look at some of these teams and the way they look at some of these situations, the thing that surprises me the most, or at least it did at the time, not so much now anymore, was the fact that they are ranking some of these Big Ten and Pac-12 teams over teams who have already made their way there. Like, Oklahoma State has an absolutely excellent season so far, but yet Ohio State is still somehow ranked ahead of them, and jumping too. Penn State is still at number 8, and they haven't played a single snap yet. We don't know exactly how good Penn State is. We don't know exactly how good Ohio State is. We haven't seen any of that. We're going based off the assumptions that we have made last year and by our best guessing and judgment based on the numbers of last year, which, to be fair, is decent logic. It makes sense to me. All professionals, they do it at the beginning of the year. The AP go off the trends of last year, who was lost, who was recruited in, stuff like that. I get it. It's crazy. It's a thought process. But at the same time, with the way things are right now, everything's still completely up in the air. Because the only thing I do know about the college football playoff and how the Big Ten and the Pac-12, when they get to that time, the ways that they can change the scope of this game and the way they can especially change the college football national championship includes the fact that, like the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl being the semifinal games, and that there's going to be a selection process, kind of a little selection show type of deal, just like doing March Madness when all the teams are waiting in the locker room to figure out if they got in or not. And the only thing we know so far is that selection weekend is going to be in the first weekend of December, and that the location happens to be in Miami, which is about as far as I know. Because when it comes to exactly what the plan is regarding the playoff, regarding how they're going to integrate the teams together, how they're going to shuffle things around, especially with the pandemic going on. They got to shuffle around some schedules too. How do those put into play? Let's say if everything goes smoothly and as the plan, then you still got some big issues there. Because some of the teams did not necessarily play the same full number of games. You might get 8 or 9 from the SEC, but the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are both sitting close to 7. Because the thing is that the Big 12 is going to pack quite a big punch when everybody comes in, especially this next week. The Big Ten has some big guns. That's the biggest issue, in my opinion at least. Once again, there's only maybe 13 to 14 schools in the football side of things. If there's one thing I can say about this Big Ten, is that it is actually absolutely intense. Because the thing is that, like a lot of these conferences, the Big Ten is only really playing against each other because of the way that the schedule lines up, the way the travel restrictions, etc. Which, of course, make perfect sense, as they should. But the thing is that there are actually a lot of big guns in this Big Ten. And if the AP poll is suggesting anything, the Big Ten could actually make some serious runs at everything that's going on lately. Because if you think of the teams who just got votes, any votes to receive the top 25, you've got Indiana, you've got Iowa, and then if you go into the actual top 25, you get Minnesota, you get Michigan, you get Wisconsin, you get Penn State, and you got Ohio State, who going into the season were arguably the favorite to win it all. I think I need to see Ohio State play before I make any sort of decision on whether or not they can beat Clemson. This shows that the AP and the coaches and whomever, they think Ohio State can play. They think that Penn State can definitely play and keep up and all that good stuff. The thing is that they easily can if they wanted to. The question is, will they? Will they live to expectations? Because a lot of the teams I've seen on the college football playoff, some of them have 2 games played, some of them have 3 games played, some of them have 5 games played. So it's actually a crazy number of games if you think about it, because what happens is that you get this discrepancy, the number of games played. And then the question is, does it turn into a battle of winning percentage? We've been talking about this for weeks, and we have yet to receive an answer from either the NCAA or the Big Ten regarding how that selection process is going to go. Now, the big thing with the Mountain West is that they don't really pack as big of a punch as the Big Ten does, just out of the simple thing of prestige within the programs, how long they've been around, the success they've had. Like, name the last national champion you can think of from the Mountain West. There most likely are not many, number one. And number two, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. You think about some of these big conferences. Oh, the SEC, a lot of southern states and Florida. ACC, East Coast. Big Ten, the Midwest. The SEC, California, and the Southwest. And the Big 12 is closer to that Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, that area. And then you get the Mountain West. No real programs to note. But the thing is that the Big Ten already puts a lot of pack in its punch, literally right out of the gate. Because the thing that is not really talked about is the fact that because there's so many ranked opponents within the Big Ten, and because there are so many teams who could easily win it all, also within the Big Ten, you get a lot of these tighter matchups where you can't really tell where it's going to go. Like Michigan and Minnesota is literally 18-21. 2 of the top teams in the Big Ten really going at it, trying to see where each team leads, where each team ranks. Ohio State facing up against Nebraska, it's mostly just going to be Justin Fields' day. The Big Ten is actually going to create a lot of interesting narratives. And if you ask me so far, we need some of that. Because right now, the only lingering question or the only thing in the narrative for anybody is Ryan Day it? Can he make it to the national finals? And with Justin Fields. And also, is Jim Harbaugh it? Can he do everything that he can do to help run this Michigan program? Because right now, the narratives are simple. Trevor Lawrence is going number 1, most likely to either the Jets or the Giants. And all these reporters are telling him he should stay in school and not even think about the draft. We're going to be talking a lot more about our recaps from Week 7 as long as I look into Week 8. And all that's going to be coming up right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, Ryan Lee here, and I'm going to do my weekly recaps because of the fact that there was no episode last Tuesday regarding the recaps of last week, so I am going to do it right now. And the Week 7 schedule, at least the way it panned out, is actually a very interesting one because we didn't really see too many crazy things. We saw a lot of what we expected. We got to see Clemson dominate an unranked opponent. We got to see a lot of ranked opponents defeat unranked opponents. And we got to see a couple of the teams on the lower end of the top 25 get upset. Kentucky beat Tennessee by a landslide, largely because their offense didn't really perform well in turnovers. Trevor Lawrence was absolutely dominant in Clemson's win over Georgia Tech. Probably one of the biggest wins, 73-7. And I'm going to talk about a lot more of these games in great detail, especially in the next segment. But the thing is that I want to talk about expectations. When they meet expectations, you're not surprised because it's what you expected of them. When they exceed expectations, you get a little surprised and be like, oh, they're doing much better than I thought. For some teams, the expectations have already been met. We already knew what they were going into it, and they're exactly what we thought they were. We know what they are. We get what they are. And sometimes they just dip a little below expectations, and we're not surprised. And then you have teams who have really high expectations, but just cannot get to where they want to be. Expectations are really hard to come by because you don't exactly know how to gauge them. And I want to focus on that last category. The one where the expectations were really high, but they really fell. For a specific team in the top 25, I had really high expectations of them. I did. I expect them to go into a road game against an unranked opponent and just at least win. I didn't expect them to beat them around. I didn't expect them to just demolish them. I just expected a win. Even 1 point, I would have expected it. I had my hopes high for them. That's where the issue lies. Because I've seen UNC play before, and they were really good. And I was like, oh, UNC might actually be a shocker pick. They could surprise people. They can make a dent. And honestly, the win versus Florida State is just a way to steamroll past everything. I was very wrong about that. I'm actually starting a new segment this week called my Upset of the Week. Kind of like how when I do Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is, I do my top 3 bets of the week. And usually those top 3 bets are most likely my top 3 games of the week. But for this, it's actually my top upset of the week. And to preempt this, I kept saying this school needs to, and I didn't say wants to, they absolutely need to prove that they are not just a basketball school. They might have the greatest basketball player of all time as an alum, but at the same time, this is not. At the same time, we're not on the court. We're on the gridiron. And the rules completely change. So, North Carolina was a top 5 team, sitting at 3-0. And they lost, got upset. For most of the game, got blown out by the Florida State Seminoles, who were sitting at 1-3 going into it, now sitting at 2-3. Tar Heels now sitting at 3-1. Because Florida State got to an early lead, 31-7, and did not blow it. Which, honestly, is kind of rare. We see blown leads all the time in football. But this one, Florida State stayed strong, even though there was a chance. If it helps for a little context of this game, North Carolina was seeded in a 13.5 point favorite right before the game. That means that all the Vegas odd makers thought that this game would be 2 scores at least. To be fair, I didn't expect this game to go the way it did. And the thing is that, according to the numbers, it looks like North Carolina would dominate this game. But at the same time, a combination of costly mistakes, bad decision making, and Florida State's defense stepping up to take down the Tar Heels kind of changed everything. I mean, yeah, the first downs are not a great ratio, 27-16. Third down efficiency is 2-12 versus 4-12 favor the Seminoles. Total yards goes to the Tar Heels. And even the breakdown of the yards, the passing yards goes advantage to North Carolina, and the rushing yards takes control of the Seminoles. Total yards is 558 to 432. Passing yards is 374 versus 191. And rushing yards is 184 to 241. Each quarterback, Jordan Travis, Sam Howell, each threw a pick. But it wasn't the end of the world. And then North Carolina dominated the clock 33-50 to 26-10. Once again, I love upsets like this because not only was North Carolina so highly ranked, according to the ESPN win probability meter, UNC was projected to win. I think its peak is at 77.9%, 78%. Sam Howell did not have himself the strongest game in the world. 20 for 36 is not terrible. Goes about 55%. He had 374 yards, which is really good. 3 touchdowns and 1 interception, which is actually pretty good. Except for that completion percentage, but that's for another day. Jordan Travis went 8 for 19 at 42%, 191 yards, a touchdown and a pick. Now, those might not be outstanding numbers for Jordan Travis because he did most of his work with his feet. 16 attempts for 107 yards and a pair of touchdowns, and LaDamian Webb was really able to hammer in that run game with 109 yards of his own. Javonte Williams really tried to put a control on this game with his legs as well, 119 yards as well with 1 touchdown. But at the same time, the Seminoles really did run most of the game because they wanted to keep North Carolina off the field as long as they could. And they successfully did that for the first half. But once again, as I said earlier, this simply comes down to poor mistakes made. Florida State gave North Carolina a lot of chances to get back in this game because they allowed 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 3 passes deflected. That's a lot of defensive disruption because Florida State allowed a sack, 5 tackles for loss, and 2 passes deflected, which is a good amount of disruption for a team who's trying everything they can to stay alive. But as I said earlier, Florida State's defense was the ones who really stepped up because they needed to keep the game in check after the kickoff. The Seminoles knew what they were doing. The Noles knew what they were doing. They know they have a good defense, and they really wanted to show up against North Carolina today. 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 3 passes deflected, which really gives a lot of disruption and really makes Sam Howell really uncomfortable. The thing is that Florida State was not tremendous after their first half because their second half drives play out as the following. And when I say that Florida State did not try to give UNC this game, I mean it. Like, they really tried to give UNC this game. A missed field goal, a punt, an interception, a missed field goal, a punt, and kneels. I spotted a turnover. I spotted 2 missed opportunities to put points on the board and a turnover. In very short drives that just result in punts. In fact, one of their drives, they ate up 7 minutes of clock just for a missed field goal. But here's the thing, UNC's was not much better throughout the game. They had 14 drives on offense, North Carolina did. I'm going to simply say this much. The pick 6 that Sam Howell threw at the end of the second half really destroyed UNC. Because right then and there, Florida State got 2 touchdowns, bang bang. And yeah, North Carolina answered on their own, but then Florida State re-answered with their own. So it kind of washed away. And I was watching that game as it was happening, and that one play brought so much juice in the building, so much juice in that team. And they really seemed to be on a roll. But at the same time, once again, I said the Noles, they had a defense who just wanted to ball out. That was my pick for upset of the week, and we are going to be coming right back with Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is, where I'm going to be talking about my picks from last week as well as my picks coming this week. That's all coming up right after this.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, Ryan Lee here. And now we're going to go into our final segment, one of my favorites, Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is, where I not only talk about the best and worst of sports bets, but I even get to teach you a little bit of something about how to make yourself that tiny bit better of a better if you were to do so. Once again, please spend your money wisely. Please be responsible. But at the same time, I want to just help educate and help to better understand the world of sports betting, because it is a very high growing industry. It is something that I think learning about is actually kind of fun because it's so intense, it's so crazy, and all that good stuff. So let's get into that. So the thing that I want to talk about today, we've talked about spread, money line, the over-unders, how to read the odds format, American and fractional. And now we're going to go into this little nice thing. You might hear this term a lot when it comes to betting because it is very popular to do this. This is for some of the guys who like to really take risks. It's referred to as the parlay. Now, what exactly does that mean? So what it means to have a parlay, it means that you're not necessarily betting on one game or one thing. You're actually betting on multiple at the same time. Now, you can look at me and say, hey, we can do, 5 individual bets, which is fine. Sure, that's fine. But there's also this thing that gets really crazy and big and complicated, but I'm going to try and simple it down for you. So if you want to bet on 5 games, but you wanted to bet on them individually, you get the winnings that you would get for each individual game. Which makes sense, right? You bet one game, and if you win, you take the winnings for that one game. And you do 5 games, let's say, you get the ones for each individual one with their respective winnings ratio. Makes sense. But the parlay is a little more complicated than that, because you can choose to put all 5 bets on one ticket. Yes, you can choose to make any single bet, say every single one of these results are going to happen at the same time, and I want to bet on those. So you're not betting on one game individually. You're betting on 5 or 3 or 10 or whatever many results happening all at once. So instead of saying, hey, I think this one thing's going to happen in this game, you're saying every single one of these things is going to happen every single one of these games, and I'm willing to take my chance on that. So if you want to, you can take Clemson minus 46 as well as Florida State plus 5, as well as North Carolina minus 14, as well as Michigan State minus 11, as well as Oklahoma minus 6.5 on one ticket, on one bet. The probability of every single one of those things happening, though, is very slim. The probability is actually so slim to the point where, in some instances, depending on how far you go with it, you can do 100 bets on one ticket. Strongly advise against that. If every single outcome that you bet on for the parlay, let's say you do 10 bets, if every single one hits, then you win. Parlay, you cannot be 500. For parlays, you cannot be 2 for 3 or 3 for 4. For parlays, you need to be perfect in order to win. But the outcome can be sometimes crazy. I've seen tickets of guys who have done parlays online who put in like $100 and they get back tens of thousands. They'll put in a few hundred and they win tens of thousands in a single betting ticket because they bet on like 7 things on the parlay or like 12 things on the parlay and every single one of them hits. Because the probability of those outcomes all happening at the same time is so low, the winnings ratio is incredibly high. So let's say hypothetically, I took all of those situations I just said. So I said Michigan State minus 11. I said Clemson minus 46. I said North Carolina minus 14. I said Florida State plus 5. And I put them into a parlay. I'm actually doing this as we speak on a betting website. I put in $100 for all those outcomes happening at once. Because they're not exactly the most probable outcome, it comes to about $1,200. Just to make it fun, I added an even less probable outcome, which was Nebraska plus 27, as well as Mississippi plus 3. $100 went from potentially $9,100 because the outcome of every single one of those events hitting is so low that if you do somehow get it right, they reward you big time. I'm not going to actually take any of these bets, but at the same time, that kind of goes into a crash course about how the parlay works. So once again, you need to be 100% if you want to do a parlay. No 50, no 75, no 2/3, perfect. And if you hit every single one of them, you will win big. Let's go into my picks from last week. Because last week, actually not last week, the week before, week 6, I was perfect. The week before that, I was 1 for 2. And the week before that, I am 2 for 1. I am currently sitting at 6-3 prior to last week. If I were to include last week, I am now 9-3. Yes, I am perfect this last week. And I'm currently riding at 75%. Knock on wood, that stays the same. Or higher. Because a lot of these games have been really good as of late. So the first game we'll be talking about is Pitt versus Miami. Now, Miami wound up taking this one at 31-19 in Miami. But the thing is that Pitt was able to keep it really close, actually. I'm actually surprised how good of a job Pitt did at containing Miami. Actually, it was so well to the point where the spread at the time was minus 13. It got updated at the last minute at minus 11.5, which is essentially minus 12. But the thing is that when I recorded last week's show, the line was at minus 13, and I did not take minus 13 for Miami. I actually took the plus 13 for Pitt because I believe they kept it close. And the line was 13 at the time, and Miami won by 12. And I was able to call that one. I don't think Miami's going to cover minus 13. Now, the thing about this game is that individually, the performances were actually pretty good. De'Aaron King went 222 yards, 4 touchdown passes, and 2 interceptions. Joey Yellen went 227 yards for a touchdown and 0 interceptions. 22 for 46, which is at 47.8%, which is not very good. But at the same time, De'Aaron King was not that much better at 51%. The thing is that Miami really tried to get the run game in a little bit more. But I knew that it was going to be a struggle for them because I called last week that the big matchup to watch was, I believe it was Pitt's running defense versus Miami's rushing attack. To be fair, Pitt held Miami pretty well in check. But at the same time, Pitt was not able to produce anything their own. Yes, Jordan Addison got 147 yards, but he didn't score. Meanwhile, De'Aaron King is slinging over to Will Mallory, who gets 2 touchdowns, and Mike Harley, who gets 1, as well as Cameron Harris, who also gets 1. But the things about games like these is that they become defensive slugfests with offense sprinkled throughout. Because the thing is, Pitt was able to bring a lot of pressure to Miami. 4 sacks, 15 tackles for loss, and 5 passes deflected. But the thing is, Miami was able to bring pressure of their own. 3 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and 7 passes deflected. They were both able to get something producing on the actual offense itself, individually at least. And in terms of team-wise, they were actually kind of close for most of it. 21 first downs versus 19 favor Miami. Total yards is 331 to 300. goes to Miami. Passing yards is 278 to 222. Advantage there goes to Pitt. However, the rushing attack is where the biggest change-up is, where it's 109 yards versus 22 in favor of Miami. And the turnover ratio is 2-1 in favor of Pitt as well. However, time possession is very even here. 30.5 minutes versus 29.5 minutes. Pitt had a chance at this game. They really did. However, there's a big issue that holds a lot of teams back when they want to go from good to great. Miami was able to get 4 touchdowns, and they didn't have to kick until they had to. Pitt got 1 touchdown and 4 kicks. That means they were close and could not get a dagger or something meaningful to switch up the trajectory of this game. Like, for an example, Pitt turned one of those Eric King interceptions into just a field goal. At least they were able to take the other interception and turn it into a touchdown, but still. You'll leave 4 points on the board, and all of a sudden it's an 8-point game. But you know what? To be fair, Eric King did have a good game. He was able to find his wide open targets, and all of his targets were able to find the end zone. I gotta give him credit for that, because he was able to do a good job at that. The next game I have from my picks of the week last week was the Texas A&M Aggies versus the Mississippi State Bulldogs, where the Aggies were favored by -5, and this ended up being a 14-point game in which the Aggies were able to take control and take a 3-1 record versus Mississippi State, who sat at 1-3. And I actually did choose the Aggies -5 in this one. It does not change the fact that I'm still going to pick Texas A&M by -5. The thing about Texas A&M is they got to a fast 14-0 lead at the half. And yes, but at the same time, after the Bulldogs scored, the Aggies responded with 2 quick touchdowns right afterward. And the second score of Mississippi State wasn't what some might refer to as garbage time. And it didn't even include the fact that one of their touchdowns was actually a pick 6. So, literally is more of good play by Mississippi State's defense on that play as opposed to their offense. Because Mississippi State as of late has struggled on offense. They really have. All signs really did point to the Aggies throughout this game. Turnover ratio 2-1. Time of possession 30.5 minutes versus 29.5 minutes. 17 first downs to 15, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it kind of does. 325 yards to 217 in favor of the Aggies. The biggest discrepancy that I have is 186 rushing yards versus -2. But Mississippi State was still able to make it interesting with 219 yards in the air versus 139 yards in the air. Now, this was actually a very interesting game because the defenses weren't exactly producing for Mississippi State, at least. For the Aggies, the defense was rolling, which is one of the reasons why the Bulldogs didn't get any offensive points until the fourth quarter, is because the Aggies were so suffocating. 6 sacks, 8 tackles for losses, and 5 passes deflected. And they even got 5 quarterback hurries, which means they were putting a lot of pressure on KJ Costello and Will Rogers. I mean, Will Rogers had himself a good day, 120 yards and a passing touchdown, and KJ Costello, not the greatest at 99 yards and a pick, but at the same time, Kellen Mond had himself a very efficient game. He wasn't terribly sloppy. He wasn't pristine either. 13 for 23, going at 56%. For 139 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick, which is very efficient. I don't know what happened to Mississippi State, but it looks like ever since their one win, ever since beating LSU in week 1, they have fallen flat on their face. They've scored no more than 14 points in a game. Actually, their point totals in the last 3 games have read 14, 2, and 14, which is sitting at a 10 average. And if you look at their defense, they're allowing 21, 24, and 28 in their last 3 games, which goes out to about a 24-point average. And this is after putting up 44 points on the defending champs. But to be fair, LSU is not the same LSU, but it doesn't matter. You put that up against the reigning national champions, and it was like the upset of the year. All of a sudden, Mississippi State can't do anything. They can't run the ball, -2 yards. And the Aggies were able to run all over them with 144 yards from Isaiah Spiller alone with the pair of touchdowns. Malik Heath can only do so much. 57 yards and a touchdown. That's as much as he can do. The Bulldogs were suffocating. Who else was suffocating? Alabama in the second quarter when they played Georgia. I also picked Alabama -5 in this game, and that worked out for me great because Alabama wound up winning by 17. 41-24. Their understanding of what they have on their team, I can see Bama taking this one -5. First down, Alabama was very efficient at 33-20. And even in terms of total yardage, they were very efficient. 417 yards versus 269. 564 to 414 in total yards. 417 yards to 269 in the passing game. Rushing game was actually pretty even, 145 to 147. However, the big difference here is the turnover ratio at 3-1. All interceptions. And possession of everything was 26 minutes to 34 minutes in favor of Alabama. The thing is, Stetson Bennett had a great game starting out, and then he threw 3 interceptions in the second half, which really threw everything out of loop. He still managed to find a pair of touchdowns, but he was under 50%. He was actually 18 for 40 to be exact, which goes out to about 45%, which is not great. They had to rely on Zamir White, who was not having himself the greatest day at only 57 yards and a touchdown. And Mac Jones was just lighting things up. 417 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. And he was 24 for 32, which is 3/4. He was 24 for 32, which is 75%. Now, one of the biggest discrepancies I found here was just attempts on the ground. This is why Alabama controlled the clock. And this is why they controlled the game. The overall attempts was for their top backs, I'm talking Najee Harris and Zamir White specifically. 31 carries for Najee Harris and the Crimson Tide versus the Georgia Bulldogs #1 back, who only had 10 carries. Alabama's logic made perfect sense. If you know that your first or second best offensive player is there and can not only produce good yards but also kill a lot of clock if you just hand it off to him, why not do it? They barely hand off the ball to Zamir White. And I get it if Kirby Smart wanted to spread the love around or whatever, but at the same time, in a game like this where it's number 2 versus number 3, this was Georgia's time to be selfish. But at the same time, they had some good production on the receiving game as well. A touchdown each from James Cook and Jermaine Burton. Cook got 101 yards as well. And Mac Jones was feeding a lot of his receiver. John Mechie was able to get 50 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Waddle got 161 yards and a touchdown. Devonta Smith got 167 and a pair. And they were able to bring pressure. Both defenses did. 2 sacks, 4 tackles for loss, and 10 passes deflected for Alabama, which means that Stetson Bennett could not get comfortable in the pocket, and he could not really find a place to throw because in the secondary, Alabama was just knocking them down. But Georgia was able to bring some of their own pressure with 3 sacks and 4 tackles for loss and 3 passes deflected as well. Alabama was just able to carry their momentum into the second half. Georgia could not. Something about Georgia just could not get the momentum back on their side, and because of that, Alabama won by a long shot, which does not surprise me, to be honest. Those were my top picks for Week 7, and coming up super shortly after the break, I'm going to go over my top picks for Week 8. That's all coming up right after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
back here for the final time here on the GSMC College Football Podcast. Ryan Lee once again here, and we are going to be going over my top picks of the week for this coming week. I think this weekend has a lot of really good games, and I'm actually excited because one of them is a return game. And when I mean a return game, I mean a game where we're saying welcome back to a conference. And two of that conference's best teams, arguably their second and third best team, are facing off against each other. Let's start with Iowa State versus Oklahoma State. Number 17 for the Cyclones versus number 6 for the Cowboys. Currently the game is sitting at -3 in favor of Oklahoma State. Now both of these teams are coming off of a trio of wins. Because currently Oklahoma State is 3-0. Iowa State is 3-1. But once again, one of the things I continue to press over and over again is how strong was the opponents that they beat. Oklahoma State played 3 not-so-great programs in Tulsa, West Virginia, and Kansas. Iowa State beat Texas Tech, who's a pretty good program. They beat Oklahoma when they were ranked. The Cyclones beat Oklahoma when they were ranked, and they also beat TCU, who's a relatively good program. I think the matchup to watch for, at least in this game, the Oklahoma State passing defense versus the Iowa State passing offense. Because the thing is that Iowa State knows how to produce on the air. And the thing is that Brock Purdy so far has had a relatively good season so far. He's sitting at 912 yards. He's currently sitting at 62% completion percentage. Has a touchdown in each of the 4 games. Has only thrown a single interception. So he's been efficient. And Oklahoma State has not allowed very much wiggle room in the passing game. But the big question is for quarterbacks like that, for players like that, who are relatively, yes, they're battle-tested, but at the same time, Oklahoma State's been looking really good. They know how to keep an offense in check. They don't give up the big yardage. They don't give up the chunk plays. And that's why I'm picking Oklahoma State -3. Also, Iowa State's defense concerns me. Concerns me a lot. Even if you look at the past history, this all leans purely towards Oklahoma State. Ever since Mike Gundy took over as head coach for Les Miles, he's gone 9 for 11 when playing against Iowa State. 9 for 11. I'm putting that into account as well. And he's also beaten Matt Campbell 3 of the last 4. So yeah, Oklahoma State knows how to bring it when it comes to the Cyclones. And -3 seems like the right number. The next game I'm actually going to look into is SMU versus Cincinnati. Because for me, at least in terms of this game, it's not necessarily about the teams themselves. It's about the line. Because I like where the line's at. Cincinnati Bearcats are sitting at 9th in the overall AP ranking, sitting at 3-0, while the SMU Mustangs are sitting at 16th, 5-0. Now, SMU knows how to really put points up on the board. 42 yards, 42 points per game versus 35. However, they're allowing 25 yards versus 12. The matchup that I want to look for specifically is how Cincinnati's defense is going to hold up against SMU's offense. Because SMU's offense is putting up 560 yards a game, 42 points per game, versus Cincinnati's 12 points a game and their 306 yards against a game. That's going to be the matchup to watch because it's strength versus strength. Because if SMU can really put it all over the place against Cincinnati, the Bearcats can struggle. But if the Bearcats can contain the Mustangs even a little bit, I can see the Bearcats pulling this one out +2.5. And the thing is, these two teams have not met each other very frequently, but at the same time, Bearcats have the advantage. And that's why I'm picking them at +2.5. The final matchup I'm going over is a return from the Big Ten. Michigan Wolverines taking on the Minnesota Golden Gophers. The Golden Gophers sitting at 21st overall in the rankings, while Michigan sits at 18th in the rankings. The line currently sits at -3.5 for Michigan, which I'm honestly a little shaky about. But this game is played in Minneapolis, where there's going to be snow, according to the weather forecast. Going off of what I saw from last year, because when it comes to new seasons, I never know what to expect. I don't like looking at the previous year's statistics because none of that matters. It's a brand new year, a brand new roster, brand new set of faces, The only thing that keeps the same is the coach, the team name, the venue, and the jerseys, and a couple of players. That's about it. Everything else is very different. They haven't played yet in the COVID era. They didn't play yet amongst all this stuff. However, what I do know is that when it comes to this Iowa versus Michigan rivalry, Michigan has had the absolute advantage. And ever since Jim Harbaugh took over, he's won the last 2 games. One of them he won by 23, the other one he won by 3. The line's sitting at minus 3.5. And that's the part where I'm shaky about. Do I think Michigan's going to win by more than 4, essentially? Do I think that Minnesota's going to need a touchdown to win? Because the last time these two teams played, it was kind of a blowout. It was 33-10, but it was also 2017. They both have a really tough Big Ten schedule. But all the reports and all the thoughts have given me time to think, and I could think and see the Wolverines pulling it out minus 3.5. Well, that has been all for today. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast. Make sure to leave a comment and leave a review because it really helps us out. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And be sure to check out our next week's show coming up on Wednesdays and Saturdays. For all of us here at the GSMC Podcast Network, I'm Ryan Lee. Thank you and have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.